Draco Malfoy and the Depths of the Mind. But Draco will hear about this. Chapter 8. Battlefields. As promised, Draco and Hermione returned to Hagrid's hut right after breakfast to convince him of the benefits of a ministry-approved curriculum. Harry and Weasley stayed behind due to their mountains of homework, though why Weasley didn't get on with it, Draco couldn't fathom. He had neither elected as many classes as Hermione and Draco, nor had he had to suffer through any detentions or extracurricular occlumency classes. And when Draco and Hermione stomped through the snow to find Hagrid's cabin deserted, he envied their inadvertent foresight. "Where is he?" he moaned, banging his elbow against the door. "It's cold! There is a crazy old hag out there who has it in for him! Now is not the time to disappear!" "Maybe he's up at Dumbledore's office to report to him?" Hermione sighed, leaning against the door. "Or maybe he's out there in the forest," Draco said grimly, "caring for whatever horrible creature he plans to throw at us in class on Tuesday." It turned out that Draco had been right. They had to wait in the cold for about half an hour before Hagrid finally appeared from between the trees, still covered in yesterday's bruises, which, if anything, seemed to have grown worse since they had seen him last night. Draco wondered if there was some kind of venom involved, keeping them from healing properly. "What are you kids doing here?" he asked as they approached. "Trying to knock some sense into you," Draco grumbled. The long wait in the cold had done nothing for his temper. "Hagrid," Hermione said tentatively, "are you sure you don't want to have these wounds checked by Madame Pomfrey? They look really bad, you know." "I told you, Hermione, I'm fine." Hagrid shrugged her off, pushing past them to unlock the door. "No need to worry about me." He pushed the door open, waving them inside. "Come in." They followed Hagrid into the relative warmth of his cabin, sighing in relief when he started a fire. Even the slabbering affection of Fang was welcome to Draco right now, seeing as the dog had body heat to warm his hands on. "Now, Hagrid," Draco began, getting down to business right away, "I know you want your class to be a surprise, and I know you are excited about what you want to teach us, but we really think you were underestimating Umbridge, and believe me, you don't want to do that. I did. It wasn't pretty." "He's right, Hagrid," Hermione nodded. "You really don't want to take any chances with her. Professor Grumpy Plank has a ministry-approved curriculum all worked out. If you just—" "I know you just want what's best for me," Hagrid interrupted her, smiling at them fondly over his shoulder as he prepared them each a cup of tea. "And I appreciate it, you know. I really do. But I know what I'm doing. You gotta let me do this my way." "But, Hagrid," Draco argued, trying his best to find the calm and patience he needed for these words to not come out the wrong way. "Your way isn't always the most conventional, you have to admit that. And Umbridge presses down on everyone who pushes just a toe over the line. Do you know what you did to Harry when he spoke up against her in class? What you did to me, too, when I tried to threaten to expose her methods?" He raised his left hand and balled his hand into a fist. The scars on the back of his hand, not quite legible but still clearly visible, stood out against his pale skin. Hermione flinched, looking away. Hagrid paused. He stepped closer, frowning, and then he reached out to inspect the back of Draco's hand. "What's that?" he growled, his voice dangerous. "What did she do to you?" "Lines," Draco scoffed. "Only they were carved into our bloody skin." "What?" Hagrid bellowed. "The bloody... Does Dumbledore know about this?" "No," Draco said grudgingly. "Harry didn't want to tell him." "Why in Merlin's name not?" Hagrid called. "He would have put a bloody stop to it. That's torture, Draco. Dumbledore won't stand for it, I'm telling you. He's never allowed students to be physically punished at his school." "But Dumbledore doesn't have the full authority over these things anymore, Hagrid," Draco sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Umbridge has been made High Inquisitor, which means she stands above him in most matters. If she wants to do something, he cannot stop her. That's how it is now." "It's an outrage!" Hagrid yelled. "A scandal!" "Well, I'm glad to see you finally grasp the seriousness of the situation," Draco commented rather bitterly. "Which is exactly why you have to be careful and play well by her. One wrong step and she'll eliminate you. So please—" "Oh, no!" Hagrid glared. "I'm not going to let her terrorize me, Draco. Not after what you just told me. That's the last thing I'm going to do." Draco gaped at him, not having expected that. "But Hagrid," Hermione piped up, alarmed. Didn't you hear what Draco just said? Umbridge is dangerous. You can't make her your enemy. She will definitely have you sacked. And from what we saw yesterday, she's already out for you.
Oh, I'm not going to make her my enemy, Hermione. Hagrid shrugged. But I'm not going to cower in fear either. I'm going to teach the best classes anyone has ever seen my way, and then we'll see what she can do about it.
Draco and Hermione exchanged an uneasy look. That's a nice thought, Hagrid, Draco said slowly. But you should know that this woman teaches her classes by letting us read a chapter on spell theory and silence, and then summarizing it each lesson. She wouldn't recognize a good class if it hit her in the face.
Exactly, Hermione nodded. So really, if you could just speak to Professor Grumpy Plank, I'm sure...
But I'm not Professor Grumpy Plank, Hermione.
Hagrid shook his head.
I'm me, and I will teach the class my way. There's a reason Dumbledore gave the job to me in the first place, and not her, you know. I betray his trust in me if I just copied another teacher's work. I have to do this on my own. Besides, nobody in their right mind would rather study gnarls than chimeras.
Draco froze. He and Hermione stared at each other. Hagrid though seemed unaware of the horror.
Gotta keep it interesting, you know. That's my strength. Giving the subject a little edge, you see?
Please tell me you don't have a chimera, Draco pleaded.
Ah,
Hagrid laughed, waving him off.
Impossible to get eggs these days, what with the ministry regulations.
Draco nodded, though he wasn't exactly soothed.
Please, Hagrid, Hermione pleaded. I understand what you're trying to say, but now is not the time to make statements by bringing, interesting creatures into class. Please bring boring, ordinary ones that all of us have seen 1,000 times and that are ministry approved. Just for Umbridge, so that we can get her off your back, so that we get to keep you.
But Hagrid was already shaking his head, a fond smile on his face, and Draco knew they had lost.
You're going to keep me, Hermione.
Hagrid smiled, ruffling her hair. It stood up rather comically as a result.
Don't you worry about that.
When their first Care of Magical Creatures lesson finally rolled around on Tuesday afternoon, the four of them were more than a little nervous. Umbridge was nowhere in sight when they arrived at Hagrid's cabin, but Draco suspected that it was only a matter of time till she turned up. They wouldn't be so lucky for her to be unavailable today of all days. Of course, to absolutely no one's surprise, Hagrid did end up leading them into the Forbidden Forest, carrying a dead cow over his shoulder.
Bit more sheltered,
Hagrid explained, completely oblivious to all his students' concerned looks.
Anyway, they prefer the dark.
What exactly preferred the dark he did not reveal to them just yet, but he did prattle along happily as they followed after him.
I've been saving a trip into the forest for your 5th year. Thought we'd go and see these creatures in their natural habitat. Now, what we're studying today is pretty rare. I reckon I'm probably the only person in Britain who's managed to train them.
Draco did not like the sound of that at all. Sure, it meant that whatever creatures Hagrid was about to show them, they were, hopefully, harmless if handled properly, but it also meant that very few people knew how to handle them properly. He exchanged a long-suffering look with Hermione, who was biting her lower lip very hard in a sign of desperation. After a 10-minute march, Hagrid came to an abrupt halt and deposited the cow carcass on the ground.
Gather round! Gather round!
Hagrid called out when most students still seemed reluctant.
Now, they'll be attracted by the smell of the meat, but I'm going to give them a call anyway, 'cause they'll like to know it's me.
The cry Hagrid emitted then was best likened to some kind of bird call. They all waited in tense silence as Hagrid repeated the call 2 more times. Then Harry nudged Draco and pointed into the dark shadows between the trees. Draco frowned, looking closer, but he couldn't make anything out. "What?" he whispered, eyes traveling back to Harry's face, noting that his friend was staring at the same spot he had indicated just now with such obvious relief that Draco felt a little taken aback. "It's the things pulling the carriages," Harry hissed, and understanding filled Draco. "Thestrals!" he breathed, his eyes traveling back to where he still couldn't see anything along the clearing. He wasn't the only one. Most of the students were staring blankly ahead. It was only Longbottom and Zabini that could apparently see the creatures as well, their eyes fixed instead of searching.
"Oh, and here comes another one!"
Hagrid announced rather proudly, Large bites began to disappear from the cow carcass, but because it happened soundlessly, no one seemed to realize. People were still waiting for the arrival of the creatures Hagrid had caught.
Now, put your hands up. Who can see him? Yeah? Yeah, I knew you'd be able to, Harry. Are you done, Evelyn? Are you, Zabini?
What are you seeing?
Parkinson hissed, turning to Zabini and looking at him sharply.
What are they?
Zabini did not meet her eyes, instead staring straight ahead, where apparently one of the creatures was standing.
Thestrals!
Hagrid explained happily, and they could hear a soft sound of comprehension from Hermione next to them.
Hogwarts has got a whole herd of them in here. Now, who knows?
But they're really unlucky.
Parvati Patil interrupted him with large eyes. Draco frowned at her, a little wary. He'd always preferred her twin. This one was a little too airheaded for his taste. As if to prove his point, she continued,
They're supposed to bring all sorts of horrible misfortune on people who see them. Professor Trelawney told me once.
No.
Hagrid stopped her, much to Draco's relief, clearly amused.
That's just superstition, that is. They aren't unlucky, they're dead clever and useful. Of course, this lot don't get a lot of work. It's mainly just pulling the school carriages unless Dumbledore's taking a long journey and don't want to apparate. And here's another couple, look!
Parvati shivered and pressed herself closer to the tree she was standing next to, calling,
I think I felt something. I think it's next to me.
Draco rolled his eyes. Harry grinned at him.
Don't worry, it won't hurt you. Right now, who can tell me why some of you can see him and some of you can't?
Both Draco and Hermione raised their hands. Draco, with a look at Hermione, snorted and relented, letting her speak.
The only people who can see Thestrals are people who have seen death, she answered.
That's exactly right.
Hagrid beamed.
10 points to Gryffindor, and 5 to Slytherin for Draco being a gentleman. Now, Thestrals...
All of Draco's insides
turned to ice.
Despite all of his nerves, prior to the lesson, he had actually forgotten all about it once the Thestrals had turned up. It had gone well. But he knew with absolute clarity that Umbridge would find a way to ruin it. Umbridge was approaching them, clipboard in hand. Hagrid's face darkened once he saw her. Obviously, he had not forgotten what Draco had told him about her on Sunday over tea.
Hello, Professor,
he said rather stiffly. You received the note I sent to your cabin this morning?
She asked in a slow, overly loud and clear voice, clearly insinuated that she doubted both Hagrid's intelligence and grasp of the English language. Draco's hands balled into fists.
Telling you that I would be inspecting your lesson?
I did, Hagrid nodded. I see you found a place. As you can see, or maybe I can't, I don't know. We're doing Thestrals today.
I'm sorry?
Umbridge interrupted him, cupping her ear in a dramatic gesture.
What did you say?
Hagrid frowned.
Thestrals,
he repeated. Surely you've heard of Thestrals, Professor? Draco spoke up, unable to help himself. He could hear Hermione groan as Umbridge's eyes narrowed in on him.
Mr. Malfoy, this may not be my class, but the rules still apply.
Umbridge said softly.
You speak only when you are spoken to. 10 points from Slytherin.
I was only trying to help, Professor, Draco said innocently. Hermione
elbowed him. Well, anyway,
Hagrid said, turning back to the class.
What was I saying?
Appears to have poor short-term memory.
Umbridge muttered as she scribbled onto her board. A few Slytherins, among them Nutcrab and Goyle, snickered. Draco, on the other hand, felt like he was going to explode.
Oh, yeah!
Hagrid continued in a valiant effort to ignore her.
Yeah, I was going to tell you how come we got a herd. Yeah, so we started off with a male and 5 females. This one...
He must have been indicating one to one of the Thestrals, though Draco couldn't see it.
Name of Tenebris. He's my special favorite. First one born here in the forest.
Are you aware,
Umbridge interrupted him,
that the Ministry of Magic has classified Thestrals as dangerous?
Draco bit his lip, closing his eyes for a moment. He knew it. He knew this would happen. Bloody hell.
Thestrals aren't dangerous,
he heard Hagrid protest.
All right, they might take a bite out of you if you're really annoying.
Shows signs of pleasure and idea of violence,
Umbridge muttered, scribbling away on her clipboard. Draco almost moaned that loud. Draco felt Harry's fingers close around his fist. He was not sure who it was supposed to calm down, Harry or him. Maybe both of them.
No, come on, Hagrid called. I mean, it'll go bad if you made it, won't it? But this rose had just got a bad reputation because of the dead thing. People used to think they were bad omens, didn't they? Just didn't understand, didn't they?
Umbridge did not answer, and Draco reluctantly opened his eyes again. She was still scribbling away on her clipboard, but when she finally looked up again, she said very loudly, "Please, continue teaching as usual. I'm going to walk among the students and ask them questions." All the while, she accompanied her speech with rudimentary sign language, and the Slytherins surrounding Nott roared with laughter. Draco was so angry, he felt sick with it. Hermione, next to him, had tears in her eyes. "You hag! You evil hag!" she whispered. "I know what you're doing, you awful twisted vicious!" Hagrid pushed on bravely, continuing the lesson as Umbridge tried to quiz Zabini and Parkinson. Draco shushed Hermione, trying to catch what they were saying. "Of course I don't particularly like the fact that I can see them," Zabini answered Umbridge's question with some contempt, "but I'm not afraid of them. I ride school carriages drawn by them various times a year. I'd have a hard job doing that if I was afraid." "I see," Umbridge said indulgently, noting something down on her board. "So am I correct in assuming you'd rather he'd not brought them into class?" "I did not say that," Zabini frowned. "I was just—" "Thank you, Mr. Zabini." Umbridge smiled sweetly, walking on. Zabini stared after her, open-mouthed and incredulous. For a moment, it looked like he was going to say something, but when Parkinson put her hand on his arm and shook her head, he grudgingly let it go. Umbridge next moved to Longbottom, whose words she managed to similarly twist. "Students are too intimidated to admit they are frightened," she muttered as she scribbled on her clipboard, much to Longbottom's horror.
No, he called. No, I'm not scared of them.
"It's quite all right,"
Umbridge soothed him before turning to Nott, Crabbe, and Goyle. Draco could not hear what was said amongst them. He could only see Umbridge scribbling furiously on her clipboard and not talking a mile a minute while Crabbe and Goyle nodded in perfect synchronization.
"I'm going to murder them in their sleep,"
Draco moaned under his breath. Harry's fingers only tightened around his fist. Finally, when it appeared Umbridge had had enough, she took her leave, naturally not without making another show of insulting Hagrid thoroughly, as she did. It took all of Draco's self-control not to land himself in detention by giving her an earful about her behavior. If it hadn't been for Harry's fingers closed around his fist, he actually might have.
"That foul line-twisting old gargoyle!"
Hermione ranted as they made their way back up to the castle again after class.
"You see what she's up to? It's that thing about half-breeds all over again." "Of course it is,"
Draco hissed, still deeply upset.
"She's going to report him to Fudge as some sort of violence-loving dim-witted troll. And the unfair thing about it is that he didn't even stand a chance from the beginning. She would have done the same thing no matter what happened in class today."
"Exactly,"
Hermione called.
"Honestly, today's class wasn't bad. If it had been blasting in skirts again, but Thestrals are fine. In fact, for Hagrid, they're really good."
Umbridge said they're dangerous, Weasley interjected.
"Umbridge can go stuff herself,"
Draco said violently.
"Umbridge would think a flabberworm is dangerous if it crossed her the wrong way. Thestrals are perfectly reasonable creatures to show us in class. Interesting, like Hagrid said."
He heaved a deep sigh when they reached the greenhouses. The Gryffindors had herbology now, while he had a free period and astronomy in the evening.
"I'll see you at dinner,"
he said, waving at them. Draco was still fuming all the way up to the castle. They had just gotten Hagrid back, and now it looked like they were going to lose him again.
Wasn't there anything anyone could do against this woman?
There had to be a way to stop her. The DA was an underhanded way of tricking her, but it didn't feel like enough. Draco hated feeling like this. So powerless, so defeated, so goated. He had almost reached the library when he crossed ways with the devil herself. Umbridge was probably on the way back to her office, and when her eyes landed on Draco, she smiled a bright, self-satisfied smile. Draco did not return it. He glared at her with all the fire he felt, not bothering to hide any emotion, any threat in his gaze. You just wait, he thought. You'll pay for this. For all of it.
They passed each other without a word, but still, Draco thought, they'd understood each other perfectly.